Hello, and welcome to Volume 3 of the Princeton Review's WordSmart vocabulary building program.
In the next hour, we're going to cover over 50 words that are among the most important, useful, and powerful in common usage today. Each group of words is broken into complementary halves. For example, the first is called true or false. That group has two parts to it, so we'll examine each half individually. First true, then false. Then, when both halves have been covered, we'll review the group as a whole and mix things up a bit. Let's start with the true words, all of which express some rough notion of truth.
First up is axiom. An axiom is any self-evident rule or truth. It often takes the form of a widely accepted saying. Everything that is living must one day die is an axiom. The reason being, one can't really argue the truth of that statement.
An axiom is also a geometry rule that doesn't have to be proven because its truth is accepted as obvious, self-evident, or unprovable. The rich get richer is an axiom. It is unquestionable. It's axiomatic.
Connected closely to its root word define, definitive means conclusive, providing the last word. The army, for example, completely wiped out the invaders. Its victory was definitive.
Walter wrote the definitive biography of Keats. Nothing more could have been added by another book. Furthermore, no one could find anything to object to in Cindy's definitive explanation of how the meteorite had gotten into the bathtub.
When something is definitive, it has the effect of defining the thing it describes. It is complete to the point of providing a definition. Definitive.
The 10 Commandments are a set of precepts. The Golden Rule, which demands that we treat others as we would treat ourselves, is also a precept.
A precept is a rule to live by, a principle establishing a certain kind of action or behavior. It's a maxim. Love thy neighbor is a precept we sometimes find difficult to follow. Our neighbor is a noisy oaf who painted his house electric blue and who throws his empty beer cans in our yard.
People accept and follow precepts because they have the ring of truth and common sense to them. For instance, bacon is the healthiest food to eat would never be a precept because it's simply ridiculous.
Indeed, any person with a brain would at least question the veracity of a statement like that.
And a good thing, too, because it's in fact not true. The veracity of that statement is more than in doubt, it's just not valid. Veracity means truthfulness. You can see the Latin root veritas, which means truth, is there. For example, the veracity of George Washington's story about the cherry tree is legendary, but we can never be sure it was anything but legend.
After falsely crying wolf 5 or 6 times, people were not inclined to trust the veracity of the boy's 7th call for help.
Along the same lines, we have verisimilitude. Try this example on for size. The verisimilitude of the counterfeit $11 bills didn't fool the eagle-eyed Treasury officer. He saw immediately that they were clever fakes.
A great combination of easily recognizable roots. Verisimilitude means similarity to reality, appearance of truth, looking like the real thing. Veri, of course, means true or real, while simile, as in similar, means like, and tude provides for being, or the state of. Put them all together, and you get the state of being like the truth.
The Godfather movies are renowned for their verisimilitude. The filmmakers went to extraordinary lengths to recreate life in turn-of-the-century New York and Italy. No details were left out or ignored. Verisimilitude.
When a fact is taken to be true without any proof, it's called a postulate. A postulate is taken to be true, not necessarily because it is, but because it is convenient to take it as such. We might be able to prove a postulate if we had the time, but not now.
A theorem is something that is proven using postulates. What's more, postulate can be used as a verb, too, only it's pronounced postulate. Sherlock Holmes rarely postulated things, waiting for evidence before he made up his mind. When you postulate something, you present an idea as true. Christopher Columbus postulated that the world was round.
He was right, and his courage was even more extraordinary given the putative notions of the day. Everyone believed the earth was flat. Putative means commonly accepted as true, supposed, or reputed.
The putative reason for placing the monument downtown is that nobody wanted it uptown. When you use the word putative, you emphasized that the reason was only supposed, not proven. This is the key to putative. Even though everyone supposed the world was flat, it turned out not to be the case.
Columbus's premise was that the world was round, and he concluded that if one kept sailing, one would eventually end up where one started. He based his conclusion on the premise that the world was round.
A premise is an assumption that is used as the basis for a conclusion. In deciding to eat all the ice cream in the freezer, my premise was that if I didn't do it, you would. Also, on the premise that two wrongs make a right, I hit him 3 times.
Now let's quickly review the words from the true section of true or false. Here they are.
Axiom.
A self-evident rule or truth.
Definitive.
Conclusive, providing the last word.
Precept.
A rule to live by. A principle establishing behavior.
Veracity.
Truthfulness.
Verisimilitude.
The appearance of truth, similarity to reality.
Postulate.
Something accepted as true without proof.
Putative.
Commonly accepted, supposed, or reputed.
Premise.
An assumption or basis for a conclusion.
And now it's time to meet a character who will use these words in the proper context.
In a court of law, truth is paramount. First, we put witnesses under oath to have them swear to the veracity of their remarks. Of course, there is no way to guarantee that everyone will speak truthfully. In fact, many professional witnesses give false testimony that seems exactly like the truth. The verisimilitude of their stories can fool even the best jury. But, unfortunately, the juries aren't pictures of righteousness either. They often condemn a defendant in their minds before the trial even starts, ignoring the fundamental American precept that one is innocent until proven guilty. While most people say they accept the putative notion that justice is blind, obviously they don't believe it in their hearts. Then there are the lawyers. They are supposed to support their arguments with valid premises. But sometimes lawyers don't base their arguments on any factual foundation at all, and still somehow manage to convince a jury that their description of an event is absolute, final, and definitive. I am skeptical, however, and unwilling simply to accept what lawyers say as postulates. I demand proof, and I can't dispute the oft-quoted axiom about our legal system. Don't trust the lawyers.
It's time to take a look at the words from the other half of the true or false group, words that connote a sense of things being fake or untrue.
Many film buffs can never forget the character of Big Daddy as played by Burl Ives in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, as he stalked his plantation accusing his family of lies and mendacity.
What better way could there be to remember the meaning of mendacious, which means lying or dishonest? Children are naturally mendacious. If you ask them what they are doing, they will automatically answer, nothing. Or, the jury saw right through the mendacity of the witness and convicted the defendant.
To be mendacious is to engage in mendacity or lying. I have no flaws, except occasional mendacity. Every once in a while, I'll tell a lie.
And speaking of movies, the film industry is in the business of spinning apocryphal tales. That's why we go to the movies, because for a couple of hours, the fictitious seems true. Apocryphal means of doubtful authenticity, fictitious, possibly untrue.
An apocryphal story is one whose truth is not proven or whose falsehood is strongly suspected. Like apocalypse, this word has a religious origin. The Apocrypha are a number of extra books of the Old Testament that the Protestants and the Jews don't include in their Bibles because they don't think they're authentic.
There is much speculation, for example, that Geraldo's stories of his many romantic conquests are apocryphal, but who really knows?
Many people don't doubt for a minute that he's lying and call his claims spurious. Unlike apocryphal, which only implies some measure of doubt, spurious means out and out false. The political candidate attributed his loss to the many spurious rumors that hounded him throughout his campaign. Spurious connotes falseness in a particularly negative way.
If you're busy trying to convince someone of something that's untrue, you're trying to delude them. For instance, the con man deluded us into thinking that he would make us rich. Instead, he tricked us into giving him several $100s.
To delude is to deceive. The deluded mental patient believed that she was a chicken. To be deluded is to suffer from a delusion. That he was a great novelist was the delusion of the English teacher who could scarcely write 2 complete sentences in a row. Nevertheless, he held the delusion that he was a great novelist.
Bert, the well-known jerk, suffered the delusion that he was a very great man. His unpleasant behavior, however, belied his impression of himself. To belie is to give a false impression of, to contradict.
Here's another example. Melvin's smile belied the grief he was feeling. Despite his happy expression, he was terribly sad inside. Or, the messy appearance of the banquet table belied the huge effort that had gone into setting it up.
A word that is sometimes confused with belie is betray. Let's look at the first example we just used again. Melvin was smiling, but a small tear in one of his eyes betrayed the grief he was feeling. His smile, however, belied his grief. That is, his smile gave a false impression. Don't confuse the two. Here's another. The fact that the groom kept his fingers crossed during the wedding ceremony betrayed his true feelings about his bride.
The loving look he gave her belied his true feelings. One cannot ignore the possibility that the groom was being duplicitous. Duplicity is the act of being two-faced, double-dealing, and deceiving.
Dave, in his duplicity, told us he wasn't going to rob the bank, and then he went right out and robbed it. Liars, like Dave, engage in duplicity all the time. They say one thing and do another. The duplicitous salesman, for example, sold me the stuffed moose, but it turned out to be a stuffed cow.
When something looks fake, even though it is supposed to look real, it is contrived. Sam's acting, for instance, was contrived. No one in the audience believed his character or enjoyed his performance. Contrived means artificial or labored.
The artist was widely admired for her originality, but her painting seemed contrived to me. And no one laughed at Dickey's contrived attempt at humor. His jokes were forced and not very funny.
And last but not least, we give you artifice. The Trojan horse, for example, was an artifice designed to fool the Greeks.
An artifice is a clever trick. Artifice also means cunning or guile. Mrs. Baker had to resort to artifice to get her children to bathe. She told them that the bathtub was filled with sugar syrup and that they could drink it if they climbed in. As you can probably see by examining their roots, artifice and artificial are related words.
All right, that's that. Now a quick review of the false words we just learned.
Mendacious.
Lying or dishonest.
Apocryphal.
Of doubtful authenticity. Mythical.
Spurious.
False or fake.
Delude.
To deceive or trick.
Belie.
To contradict or give a false impression of.
Duplicity.
The act of being two-faced or double-dealing.
Contrived.
Artificial, labored, or forced.
Artifice.
A clever trick, also cunning, guile. And now, to put these false words to good use, we present Marvin the Magician.
As an illusionist, it's my job to fool my audience, to delude them into believing that what should be impossible is, in fact, real. Some people object to this trickery. They think of it as lying. But that's what magic is. Clever tricks are my trade, and artifice is my art. In fact, some of the tricks are very difficult to execute, and the smile on my face belies the effort I'm making. Now, it is true that many critics don't like my work. Some say my tricks are too forced and contrived. Others say that I have stolen my greatest tricks from other master magicians. Such accusations are false, mean-spirited, and outright spurious, and I deny them completely. This profession is full of lying and mendacious types who thrive on the downfall of others. I would never double-cross any of my colleagues. I am incapable of such duplicitous behavior. If anything, it's other magicians who steal. From me. Those cheats will stop at nothing. They've even been spreading this bizarre myth, this apocryphal story about my having died during an underwater coffin escape attempt last June.
And now we mix up all the words from both halves of the group true or false.
First, we'll simply name a word and give you time to think of the definition. After the pause, a concise definition will follow, along with another example.
Here then are all the words from the true or false group.
Putative. Putative means commonly accepted, supposed, or reputed. The putative makeup of the moon was green cheese.
Mendacious. Mendacious means lying and dishonest. The mendacious athlete swore that he had used no steroids, even though he ran a mile in under 30 seconds. Artifice. An artifice is a clever trick and also means cunning. Orson Welles, even as a youngster, was a master of cinematic artifice.
Veracity. Veracity means truthfulness. Lie detector tests are designed to test the veracity of the test taker's remarks. Axiom. An axiom is a self-evident truth or widely accepted saying. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, otherwise known as the Golden Rule, is an axiom.
Duplicity. Duplicity means double-crossing, underhanded, and deceitful. My duplicitous friend swore she wasn't interested in my boyfriend, but then went out with him last night. My boyfriend was guilty of duplicity too.
Verisimilitude. Verisimilitude means similarity to reality, appearance of truth, or simply looking like the real thing. I painted my walls to look like marble and was amazed by their verisimilitude. It actually looked like marble. Definitive. Definitive means conclusive or providing the final word. Ian's model of the DNA molecule was definitive. It could not possibly have been improved upon.
Apocryphal. Apocryphal means of dubious authenticity, possibly untrue or mythical. The much-touted rivalry between Betty Davis and Joan Crawford has been described by many as apocryphal. They may have been the best of friends. Delude. To delude means to deceive, to convince someone that something false is actually true. The evil accountant deluded the old woman into believing that she owed no taxes. Her jail cell in federal prison proves otherwise.
Postulate. A postulate is something that is accepted as true without the need for proof. They usually support larger arguments. For example, that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west is a postulate that may have helped prove that the world is round.
Spurious. Something spurious is definitely false. Reports that the Academy Award-winning actress was also an accomplished porn star were decried as spurious by her press representative.
Precept. A precept is a simple rule or maxim. The only things you can depend upon are death and taxes is a commonly accepted precept.
Contrived. Something contrived is forced and artificial at the same time. The plots of many sequels are heavily contrived. They aren't supposed to seem plausible, they're just pulled together to give the stars a chance to appear on screen again.
Premise. A premise is an assumption or the basis for a conclusion. The fact that I burned my hand when I touched the door was the premise by which I concluded that there was a fire in the hallway.
Belie. To belie something is to contradict it or to prove it false. The calm weather belied the fury of the coming hurricane.
And that marks the end of the true or false group of words. Be sure to take a look at the word spellings on the enclosed insert card. Getting a feel for how the words look written out can be a big help in memorizing their meanings. And now, without further delay, we bring you more words, more definitions, and more craftily written examples. Let's begin.
Our next group is called From the Sublime to the Ridiculous. We'll be discussing words that describe things that are near perfect as well as things that are far from perfect, maybe even downright strange.
Let's start at the very beginning and cover the sublime words first. As a matter of fact, let's let sublime be the first word. This one we reserve for use only when describing things that are so wonderful they go beyond all average standards of descriptions.
After winning $70 million in the lottery and quitting our jobs as sewer workers, our happiness was sublime. Sublime means awe-inspiring, extremely high, lofty, and majestic. Consummate means perfect, complete, or supreme.
A consummate pianist is an extremely good one. Nothing is lacking from the way he or she plays. Consummate is also a verb. Notice the different pronunciation. To consummate something is to finish it or make it complete. Signing a contract would consummate an agreement.
If that agreement is very sacred, like a marriage, then it's sacrosanct. A church is sacrosanct.
Sacrosanct is also used loosely and often ironically outside of religion. For instance, Mr. Peter's lunchtime trip to his neighborhood bar was sacrosanct. He would no sooner skip it than he would skip his mother's funeral.
Some people think that the Corvette is the apotheosis of American car making. They think it is the ideal. Apotheosis means the perfect or divine example of something. Jeffrey is unbearable to be with. He thinks he's the apotheosis of masculinity.
Well, maybe he is. And maybe Elvis is the apotheosis of a popular entertainer. Actually, there's no doubt about it. He is the apotheosis of all that is great about rock and roll.
Indeed he is. He holds the singular distinction of being a popular performer with several churches devoted to him. Singular means unique, superior, exceptional, or sometimes strange. Dale, for example, had the singular ability to stand on one big toe for several hours at a stretch.
There was a man on the train this morning who had a singular deformity. Both of his ears were on the same side of his head. A singularity is a unique occurrence. Singularity is also the quality of being unique. Just remember one singular sensation from the Broadway musical A Chorus Line, and you can't go wrong.
Profound means deep. Deep in a variety of ways. Profound understanding is deep understanding, like Einstein's understanding of physics. To say something is profound is to say that it's deeply intelligent or discerning.
Profound dislike is deep dislike. The noun of profound is profundity.
Einstein's head was replete with ideas concerning the nature of the universe. Or, the once polluted stream is now clean and replete with fish of every description.
Replete means completely filled, abounding. Another example. The groom ate all 9 courses at the wedding banquet. He was filled to the point of repletion. Replete. The bride and groom drove away in a stretch limousine, replete with fuzzy dice and bumper stickers.
The last word in this half of the sublime group is exemplify. Exemplify means to illustrate by example, to serve as a good example. Fred, for instance, participated in every class discussion and typed all of his term papers. His teacher thought Fred exemplified the model student.
And Fred's classmates probably hated him. But anyway, an exemplar is an ideal model, while exemplary means outstanding and worthy of imitation. Any way you slice it, to exemplify is to be really, really good.
Now we're ready for a quick review of the sublime.
Profound.
Very deep and or meaningful.
Replete.
Abounding or completely filled with something.
Singular.
Unique, superior, exceptional, or strange.
Apotheosis.
The perfect or divine version of something.
Exemplify.
To serve as a good example.
Consummate.
Perfect, complete, supremely skillful.
Sublime.
Awesome, majestic, extremely wonderful.
Sacrosanct.
Sacred, untouchable or unassailable.
In order to get an idea of how these words actually function out there in the real world, here's someone who'll use them in context. And now, here's Madhavista, the Himalayan holy man.
Greetings and peace. I help people realize their eternal connections to the earth and sky and show them how to achieve a deep, lasting, truly profound sense of serenity. Here in our small mountain monastery, we perform a variety of rituals, each overflowing with songs and chants. The rituals are replete with the ancient words and music that bring us closer to oneness. The feeling of oneness is like no other. It is unique, strange, truly singular. It was my former master who taught me to achieve this special state. He was a perfect, enlightened one, the apotheosis of a Himalayan holy man. More than any other teacher I've had, I modeled myself after him, for he exemplified all that is good about our beliefs. But beyond his great holiness, he also had supreme mastery of his voice. He was the consummate Vedic chanter. There was not a monk in all of India that could top him. Like my master before me, I help people to get in touch with their inner selves to achieve overwhelming feelings of joy that can only be described as sublime,
surpassing our previous feelings of goodness and satisfaction. Many Westerners do not understand our work here, but to all of us at the monastery, rituals are just as holy, just as sacrosanct as the rituals of Western religions. I must go meditate now. Shanti.
And now it's on to the ridiculous half of our group. This is a wide-ranging group of words that mean dull, poorly made, absurd, wrong, or bizarre.
Let's start with gratuitous. We'll begin with an example. The scathing review of the movie contains several gratuitous remarks about the sex life of the director.
Gratuitous means uncalled for, unjustified, unprovoked, and freely given out. Their attack against us was gratuitous. We had never done anything to offend them. Gratuitous is often misunderstood because it is confused with gratuity, which means a tip, like the one you leave in a restaurant. It's a nice thing. Gratuitous, however, is not a nice word.
When things don't go according to plan or where you wanted them to go, they can be said to have gone awry. For example, the hunter's bullet went awry. Instead of hitting the helpless deer, it hit another hunter.
Awry means both off course and twisted to one side. When we couldn't find a restaurant, our dinner plans went awry. And as if that weren't enough, the old man's hat was awry. It had dipped in front of his left eye.
Things went awry for the novelist whose new book was called Inane by the critics. It was particularly hurtful since he had a reputation for writing profound and relevant books. Inane means silly and senseless.
Right. Your plan to make an indoor swimming pool by flooding your basement was inane. Or Mel made a few inane comments about the importance of chewing only on the left side of one's mouth. Then he passed out.
Something that is inane is an inanity. And no, filling the basement was a fine idea. It's just that it was an anomaly, and no one knew how to deal with it. An anomaly is an irregularity, an exception to the rule.
For example, a snowy winter day is not an anomaly, but a snowy day in July is. What's more, a house without a roof is an anomaly, a cold and wet anomaly. Or a tiger with no stripes is an anomaly, and a stripeless tiger is called anomalous. That's the adjective form.
That's right. Something irregular or not normal is anomalous, like an anomaly. And just think about life in a roofless house. Things would probably quickly degenerate, which means to break down, deteriorate, or get worse. Or the discussion quickly degenerated into an argument.
Or try this. Over the years, the nice old neighborhood had degenerated into a terrible slum. Also, the fans' behavior degenerated as the game went on. This word can also be used in noun form.
True. A person whose behavior has degenerated can be called a degenerate. Notice the pronunciation is different. It can even be an adjective, as in, the flasher's behavior is degenerate. Whatever the form, the word essentially means the same thing.
Here's a good word, banal. Listen to this. The dinner conversation was so banal that Amanda fell asleep in her dessert dish. It means really unoriginal or very ordinary.
A banal statement is boring, trite, and uncreative. It is, in a word, a banality. What made Amanda fall asleep was the banality of the dinner conversation. It was incredibly dull. Banal.
Knowing Amanda, however, it's no surprise she was bored. She herself has so many idiosyncrasies, only the most bizarre things keep her interested. An idiosyncrasy is a unique peculiarity. Eating green beans drenched in ketchup is one of her many idiosyncrasies.
The doctor's interest was aroused by an idiosyncrasy in Bill's skull. There seemed to be a coin slot in the back of his head. Bill is idiosyncratic. So is Tara's driving. She seems to prefer the sidewalk to the street. Any strange behavior that characterizes someone or something is an idiosyncrasy.
And finally, we give you a word that means romantic or idealistic to a foolish degree. Here it is in a sentence. For many years, Mr. Morris led a quixotic effort to repeal the federal income tax.
The word quixotic is derived from the name Don Quixote, the main character in Cervantes' classic 17th century novel. His romantic idealism almost invariably got him into trouble. His habit of fighting windmills exemplified his quixotic ideals.
To be quixotic is to be as foolish or impractical as Don Quixote in pursuing an ideal. Another example. The political organization had once been a powerful force in Washington, but its membership had dwindled as its causes became more and more quixotic.
I think it's time for a quick review.
Okay, we'll cover just the ridiculous words. I'll start. Here's anomaly.
An abnormality, an aberration or irregularity.
Quixotic.
Romantic or idealistic to a foolish degree.
Awry.
Off course or twisted to one side.
Banal.
Unoriginal or ordinary.
Degenerate.
To break down or deteriorate.
Inane.
Silly or senseless.
Idiosyncrasy.
A peculiarity or eccentricity.
Gratuitous.
Unprovoked, unsolicited, uncalled for, and freely given.
Good. Now it's time to introduce you to an eccentric abstract expressionist artist so you can hear these words in action. Without further ado, then, here is Irena Kuvobi.
I am not normal. I am not like anyone or anything else. I am an anomaly even among artists. In my art, I reject everything that's ever been done before. All art before mine is just too ordinary, boring, and banal. My art springs from my own uniqueness. It is the sum of all my personal eccentricities and idiosyncrasies. It is also efficient art. Nothing is extra or uncalled for, because I loathe gratuitous frills and excess. In my effort to avoid creating senseless, silly, or otherwise inane works of art, I am always reaching for the impossible. My current effort to wrap the Empire State Building in a golden sheath of latex has been called overambitious, impractical, and even quixotic by many skeptics, many who just don't understand my plans. I admit I am currently off course and my plans have gone awry. If I can only keep the mediocrity hounds from entering my space, I can put things back on track again. I need time to stop this work from degenerating further, from falling apart completely. More funding would help.
Now, of course, it's time to put all the words from our group, from the sublime to the ridiculous, together and give them a final run-through.
Remember to fill in the definition in the pause that follows each word. Ready? Avanti.
Sacrosanct. Sacrosanct means sacred, not to be changed. Julian's ritual of kissing the airplane before he boarded was sacrosanct. Without that kiss, he refused to fly. No questions asked.
Gratuitous. Something gratuitous is unprovoked, uncalled for, freely given, and unfriendly. After she fired my friend Polly, her boss slapped her face. Now that's gratuitous behavior.
Profound. Profound means deep in a spiritual or intellectual way. The philosophy his ideas on the nature of existence were truly profound. Just talking to him made me feel as though I might not exist.
Awry. When something has gone awry, it's gotten off course, gone bad, or, quite literally, been bent out of shape. After that little boy touched the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, somehow it looked awry. It certainly wasn't hanging straight.
Consummate. Consummate means perfect and complete. Ella Fitzgerald, for instance, is the consummate singer of the 20th century. Her singing says it all, and no one can do better.
Quixotic. Quixotic means idealistic and romantic to a foolish degree. Derek's effort to aid every old lady in the city to cross the street was quixotic, to say the least. Inane. Inane means silly, pointless, or senseless. After hours of viewing reruns, the inanity of Gilligan's Island gave me vertigo.
Replete. Replete means completely filled, abounding. The snazzy hotel penthouse suite was replete with every possible convenience and luxury.
Idiosyncrasy. An idiosyncrasy is a peculiarity or eccentricity specific to one person or thing. Alicia's many idiosyncrasies, such as her shaved head and penchant for chirping TV theme songs, drive me nuts.
Apotheosis. An apotheosis is a perfect example or divine version of something. Nadia Comaneci was the apotheosis of women's gymnastics. 7 perfect 10s make her the best of the best.
Degenerate. To degenerate means to fall apart or to break down. Our romantic evening out together swiftly degenerated into a nasty battle over which movie we'd go to.
Singular. Something singular is unique or extraordinary. Moses' parting of the Red Sea was indeed a singular event in history, apocryphal though it may be. Sublime. Sublime is awesome, lofty, and extremely wonderful. The feeling of winning the Best Actress Oscar was sublime, but then again, so was the performance.
Anomaly. An anomaly is a deviation, irregularity, or exception to the rule. Monica's clock is an anomaly. It has 3 hands and 13 numbers. Banal. If a thing is banal, it's unoriginal, ordinary, and dull. Despite its immense popularity, Dynasty was among the most banal television shows in history.
Exemplify. To exemplify something is to serve as a good example of it. You, for example, exemplify brightness, alacrity, and eagerness to do the right thing.
Why, thank you, that's very kind. You too are fun to work with, but more on that later.
At this point, we've come to the end of the whole word group. We've completed From the Sublime to the Ridiculous. Let's move on to Something Old, Something New.
I was wondering when we were going to get to this one. We'll be covering words, clearly enough, which describe old and new things. It's just that simple.
So let's get started. Something new.
Don't confuse this first word with its other meaning, a work of fiction. Novel can also mean new and original. Ray, for instance, had a novel approach to homework. He just didn't do it. Ray failed geometry as a result of this novelty.
If I may be permitted to pun, there was nothing novel about the author's latest novel. The characters were old and the plot borrowed. It's the idea of originality that really sets the word novel apart from a word like new. Something novel is more than just new. It's clever and original.
Kind of like some of Shakespeare's plays. Can it come as any surprise that Shakespeare wrote so many great plays since he lived during the most fertile and exciting period in history?
You mean the Renaissance?
Yes. And as a matter of fact, that's the next word. When something is nascent, it's being born. Anyone familiar with French or Spanish will know that word. Add the prefix re, and you get Renaissance, or a period of rebirth. When you use a capital R in your use of the word Renaissance, you're talking about the great blossoming of art, literature, science, and culture that transformed Europe between the 14th and 17th centuries. The word is often used, however, without a capital R in connection with lesser rebirths.
For example, the declining neighborhood underwent a renaissance when a group of investors bought several crumbling tenements and turned them into attractive apartment buildings.
Or, the small college's football team endured many losing seasons, but underwent a dramatic renaissance when the new coach recruited half a dozen 300-pound freshmen.
When you want to bring up a new subject for discussion, especially a delicate one, you broach it. Henrietta was proud of her new dress, so no one knew how to broach the subject with her of how silly grandmothers look in leather. Not to mention how hard it was to broach the subject of how tasteless her plastic brooch looked stuck in her blue lapel.
Yikes, that's one ugly outfit. Who but a crazy grandmother could beget such an ensemble and get away with it? Beget means to give birth to create. Also, it can mean to lead to and to cause.
Those who lie should be creative and have good memories, since one lie often begets another lie, which begets another. Also, those familiar with the early chapters of the Old Testament will remember how so-and-so begot so-and-so who begot so-and-so, and so on and so on.
Another word that has a meaning similar to beget is spawn. We often hear about how salmon swim upstream in order to spawn. Well, there's really no mystery about what they're doing up there, is there? Spawn means to produce a large number, to bring forth.
One need not refer only to biological functions when using spawn. Take this example. A best-selling book or blockbuster movie will inevitably spawn dozens of imitators. Of course, after The Exorcist came out, not only did it spawn countless sequels and cheap imitations, but furthermore, people everywhere were convinced that demons had spawned inside their bodies.
Who could forget? All those demons spawn running around during the late 70s and early 80s.
Now, visionary is a little bit tough because it often gets used incorrectly. Literally, it means a dreamer, a person with impractical goals or ideas about the future. Very often, it gets used to describe people who were ahead of their time or who did things which were very original and then became popular because of how valuable they were.
But what you're saying is that it means impractical and dreamy, as in, my uncle was a visionary, not a businessman. He spent too much time tinkering with his anti-gravity generator and not enough time running his plumbing business.
Exactly. Here's another. The candidate was a visionary. He had a lot of big ideas, but no realistic plan for putting them into practice. What's more, visionary can also be an adjective. For instance, a visionary proposal is an idealistic and usually impractical proposal.
Well, I'll be sure to use visionary in the right way from now on. But in return, you have to learn how to use the word provident.
But I already do know how. Listen, we were provident with our limited food supplies, knowing that the winter ahead would be long and cold. Provident is an adjective that describes people who prepare and provide for the future and are frugal.
Well, it seems you do know how to use provident. Now it's my turn. The provident father had set aside money long ago for the college education of his children. Moreover, to be improvident is to fail to provide for the future. It was improvident of the grasshopper not to store any food for the winter, unlike his acquaintance, the provident ant.
It could have been that the grasshopper simply planned to replenish his supply as the winter wore on. To replenish means to fill again, to resupply, and to restore.
This is the last of the something new words, but here are a few more examples. The manager of the hardware store needed to replenish his stock. Quite a few of the shelves were empty. Or, the commanding general replenished his army with a trainload of food and other supplies.
Here's one. After the big Thanksgiving meal, everyone felt replenished. The act of replenishing is a replenishment. The replenishment of our wood supply was our first thought after the big snowstorm.
Now it's time for a quick review of the words we just learned. We'll give you the words again, followed by simple definitions of each. First up,
Novel.
novel means new and original.
Renaissance.
A renaissance is a rebirth or revitalization.
Beget.
To give birth to create, or to lead to.
Spawn.
To spawn is to produce in great numbers, to give rise to.
Broach.
To broach is to bring up a subject, usually a delicate one.
Visionary.
Impractically idealistic about the future, an idealist.
Provident.
Prepared for, providing for the future.
Replenish.
To fill again, to resupply, to restore.
And now, we're going to introduce you to someone who can really make these words come to life.
Here's the mayor of our fine city, Boyd Perry.
Fellow Metropolitans, you are to be congratulated. It is your hard work and commitment that have rebuilt our fair town and sparked an urban renaissance. It was clear that new and original tactics were called for, and our approach to this task was a novel one. Many thought our plans for the future were idealistic, if impractical, and I, of course, was called a visionary. But as time has proven, our foresight at the time was indeed provident, and our future, therefore, seems assured. Our civic spirit, which was nearly gone, has been replenished, as our city's prospects are once again bright. And, as anyone will tell you, happiness breeds more happiness, which in turn begets more good things, and so on and so on. But just look around the country, my friends, and see how our extraordinary effort has spawned countless similar efforts in cities like ours. That said, it is with little hesitation that I will broach the subject of my re-election. Hello, fellow Metropolitans! Hello!
Now let's move on to the words from the other half of this group, something old. There's no need to explain that these words all describe things that are old or that came before.
All right, let's get started late in the alphabet with vestige. See if you can figure out the meaning by hearing it in context first. The unhappy young man found vestiges of his fiancée in the rubble. The explosion had effectively ended their romance.
Oh, that's pleasant. A vestige is a remaining little piece of something, a last trace. Here's another, less gruesome example. An old uniform and tattered scrapbook were the only vestiges of the old man's career as a professional athlete. Also, your appendix is a vestige. It used to have a function, but now this organ does nothing.
No, that's not unpleasant at all. The adjective form of vestige is vestigial. The appendix is referred to as a vestigial organ. It is still in our bodies, although it no longer has a function. It is a mere vestige of some function our digestive systems no longer perform.
Perhaps it's not a vestige at all and is actually a precursor to something that hasn't shown up yet. A precursor is a forerunner, something that comes before and paves the way for whatever it is that follows.
This weekend, I'll be vacationing in a friend's rustic cottage up on Lake Kwakahuchi. It's pretty enough, but I'll miss having a hot shower, television, and electric lights.
I see. Rustic means rural, lacking urban comforts, or primitive. It can also be used as a noun, as follows. A rustic is an unsophisticated person from the country.
That rustic log cabin I'll be staying in was the antecedent to most of American residential architecture. The prefix ante, A-N-T-E, almost always means before, so it makes sense that the word antecedent means something that came before.
It can also mean the model for something that came after, like your friend's log cabin. Also, your grandparents, as well as your parents, could be said to be your antecedents. They came before you, and they are in many ways models for how you turned out.
The horse-drawn carriage is an antecedent of the modern automobile. Antecedent also works well as an adjective. For instance, the oil lamp was antecedent to the light bulb.
A good way to remember antecedent is that it is related to a word that's similar in meaning, precedent, which means an earlier example of something. Precedent is the noun form of the verb to proceed or to go before. To set a precedent is to do something that sets an example for what may follow.
The major difference between precedent and antecedent is that an antecedent usually is different, more primitive than the things that came after it. A precedent is usually very similar, as it is in the law. For example, George's consumption of 400 hot dogs has no precedent. No one had ever done it before. In other words, it was unprecedented. It was entirely new.
How about this? Last year's $1 million prom set a precedent that the current student council hopes will not be followed in the future. That is, they hope that future proms won't cost $1 million.
Spending that kind of money for a high school dance does, after all, go against both tradition and convention. When something is conventional, it's common, customary, and unexceptional. For instance, the architect's conventional designs didn't win him awards for originality.
Tipping the waiter in a restaurant is a conventional courtesy. It's often used as a buzzword for old hat, as in the following example. Conventional wisdom is what everyone thinks. The bland politician maintained his popularity by never straying far from the conventional wisdom about any topic. It's really the opposite of novel.
Here's a word that doesn't in and of itself mean old, but is often used in conjunction with old or simple ideas. Rudimentary, which means basic, crude, or unformed. The primitive tribe's tools were very rudimentary. In fact, they looked more like rocks than tools.
Here's one. The boy who had lived with wolves for 15 years lacked even the most rudimentary social skills. That's when you're using rudimentary to mean basic. Here's one for use as crude. The strange creature had small bumps on its torso that appeared to be rudimentary arms and hands.
More pleasantries, I see. Let's move on to the last word in this group. Here's an example first. For a happy life, eat figs is not an adage. No one ever said it before this moment. Honesty is the best policy is an adage. An adage is an old saying, a familiar bit of wisdom. The key is an adage must be old, tried, and true. Have you got one?
An apple a day keeps the doctor away. An old chestnut, but nevertheless an adage. Likewise, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Adages are often cliches, but that's an inevitable result of standing the test of time.
And speaking of which, it's time for a quick review of our words from something old.
Vestige,
A last remaining trace of something.
precursor,
Predecessor. Something that comes before and paves the way for what comes after.
Antecedent.
Someone or something that went before and provides a primitive model for what followed.
Conventional.
Common, customary, or unexceptional.
Precedent.
An earlier example of something or someone.
Rustic.
Rural, lacking in sophistication, primitive.
Rudimentary.
Basic, crude, unformed, or undeveloped.
Adage.
An adage is an old familiar saying, a cliched bit of wisdom.
And now, as you all know, it's time to hear the words used in context. So without further delay, meet Joan Whifflamue, Museum Curator.
Yes, the recent theft of our prized antique mannequin has caused much anxiety. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure is an old adage that should have been heeded. I have lobbied for better security, arguing that even the most basic, rudimentary alarm system would be an improvement over having nothing at all. At some point, the board of directors must realize that urban ills have encroached on our primitive, rustic little enclave here, and the museum demands more sophisticated care and maintenance. This sort of thing has happened before. There are, in fact, several precedents in our history. I tried to explain how the previous theft of our collection of ancient keyhole ornaments was surely a precursor to many thefts still to come. I mean, for God's sake, even the most common, traditional, conventional wisdom says protect what we have left. After so many robberies, we're down to the last vestiges of what was once a large and important collection. This current theft is especially devastating because the mannequin is the oldest antecedent of all modern-day storefront mannequins. Such a loss. Such a shame.
The time has come then to rally together all of the words from the group Something Old, Something New.
We'll be following the same format we always have. Let's begin.
Vestige. A vestige is a last trace. After the earthquake, the only vestiges of my home were the smoldering foundations.
Renaissance. A renaissance is a rebirth or revitalization. My parents' remarriage marked the unlikely renaissance of my fractured family. Spawn. To spawn is to reproduce in large amounts. Frogs don't just give birth, they spawn thousands of offspring from a large nest of eggs.
Rudimentary. Rudimentary means very basic, crude, or primitive. Calculus. I can't even grasp the most rudimentary concepts of basic mathematics.
Novel. Something novel is new and original. Montague's five-wheeled bicycle was a novel but effective invention.
Conventional. Conventional is common, unexceptional, or old hat. Mistress Formica's unimpressive approach to the dance of the tarantella was conventional, to say the least.
Broach. To broach a subject is to bring it up. I was afraid to broach the issue of my moonlighting as a stripper, for I didn't want to anger my family.
Adage. An adage is an old familiar saying that carries some amount of wisdom. That's the way the cookie crumbles is an example of a classic adage. Antecedent. An antecedent is anything that came before and provided the basic blueprint or model for that which came after. Ancient campfires were the antecedents of today's modern nuclear reactors.
Beget. To beget is to bring forth, to lead to create. In cycles of family behavior, one generation's actions inevitably beget similar actions in the following generations.
Rustic. Rustic means rural, primitive, lacking sophistication. Leland's New York apartment is surprisingly rustic. It has no electricity, no furniture, and water must be carried back from the nearby fire hydrant.
Provident. Provident means prepared for and providing for the future. Squirrels are notoriously provident rodents. They spend all of spring storing food for the winter.
Precursor. A precursor is a forerunner or anything that comes before and makes things ready for whatever comes next. The drip from the ceiling was only the precursor to the roof's caving in completely.
Replenish. To replenish is to refill, restore, or to resupply. Anyone who finishes all the cookies has to replenish the cookie jar. Visionary. A visionary is someone with lofty, if impractical, ideals about the future and what it holds. Icarus was a visionary, for man did not achieve flight for thousands of years after his first, rather failed attempt.
Precedent. A precedent is an example of something that has come before. When the lawyer called for the death penalty, he cited several precedents in the law which called for the same sentence for a similar crime.
And there we are. We've covered all the words from something old, something new.
When you feel you have a good grasp of the words, try using them in conversations with friends and in your writings.